The week my son Nathan got married, I made a decision I told no one about. Not my daughter, not my lawyer, not even my oldest friend Gerald, who had known me since we were both young men working the same floor at a paper mill in Kenora, Ontario. I kept it to myself. The way you keep certain things when you've lived long enough to know that silence, sometimes, is the only armor you have left. That decision ended up saving everything. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to where this really started. Not the wedding, and not the morning Cassandra showed up at my door with a notary and a folder full of papers she expected me to sign. It started 2 years before any of that, on a Tuesday in November, when my wife Dorothy died in the bedroom of the house we had shared for 31 years. Dorothy was 62 years old. She had been healthy her whole life, walked every morning, didn't smoke, ate the way her mother had taught her, simply and without waste. The cancer came from nowhere, as it often does, and it moved fast. 8 months from the first diagnosis to the last morning, I held her hand in that room with the pale yellow curtains she had chosen herself 20 years earlier, because she said they made the light look like honey. I am not going to spend a long time on that grief, because this story is not really about losing Dorothy. It is about what her love left behind, and what one person in my family decided that love was worth to her. Dorothy had grown up in the Okanagan Valley in British Columbia. Her family had owned a small cherry and apple orchard outside of Summerland since the 1950s, passed down from her grandfather to her parents, and eventually to Dorothy and her brother Len when their parents passed. Len had no interest in farming. He had moved to Calgary in his 20s and built a life in commercial real estate. So Dorothy and I had bought out his share when we were in our late 40s. We had managed the property together ever since, renting it to a local family who worked it every season and paid us a modest lease. It was not a fortune, but it was land. 12 acres of it, with a 2-bedroom house on the property, and a view of Okanagan Lake that made you feel, every single time you saw it, like the world was still mostly good. When Dorothy died, she left everything to me. The orchard, the house in Thunder Bay, the savings we had built together over 3 decades. She had written it all out carefully, with a lawyer in town, 2 years before she was diagnosed. Dorothy was like that. She did not wait for bad things to happen before she prepared for them. She wrote me a letter that the lawyer gave me after the funeral, and in it she said, "Arthur, this land is yours now. Don't let anyone take it from you. Not even people we love." I read that letter many times over the following months. At first I thought she was being poetic. Later, I understood she was being specific. My son Nathan was 34 when his mother died. He had always been close to Dorothy, closer than my daughter Patricia, in some ways, though Patricia and I had our own bond that was quieter but just as deep. Nathan had her eyes and her stubbornness, and when he grieved hard. I respected that. What I did not see, in those early months, was how grief can also be a door that the wrong person walks through. He had been dating Cassandra for about a year when Dorothy passed. I had met her a handful of times. She was sharp, well-dressed, always with something slightly too polished about her smile, the kind of polish that takes effort. She worked in marketing in Toronto, made good money, had opinions about everything. I was not charmed, exactly, but I was civil. Nathan was happy, or seemed to be, and I had not yet had reason to feel otherwise. They got engaged 8 months after the funeral. I told Nathan I was glad for him, and I meant it, mostly. I helped him with the ring. He asked me what his mother would have thought of Cassandra, and I said, Dorothy always wanted him to find someone who challenged him. It was the most honest answer I could give. The wedding was in June, at a vineyard outside Niagara on the lake. It was beautiful, in that expensive way that Cassandra had clearly planned for a long time. 220 guests, a string quartet during dinner, favors at every table that cost more than a meal. I danced once with Patricia, who leaned in close and said, very quietly, "She's done her research, Dad." I asked her what she meant. Patricia just smiled and looked across the room to where Cassandra was laughing with her mother, and changed the subject. I thought about that comment for the rest of the evening. The night before the wedding, I had sat alone in my hotel room in Niagara-on-the-Lake and made my decision. I had already spoken to my lawyer in Thunder Bay, a woman named Helen Parsons, who had known Dorothy and had handled our estate planning for years. I had already taken the steps I needed to take, and I decided that no matter what anyone asked me over the coming weeks and months, I would not mention the orchard. I would not mention the Summerland property, the 12 acres, the house, with the view of the lake, any of it. Dorothy had said, "Don't let anyone take it from you." I was beginning to understand what she meant. The first sign came 9 days after the wedding. Nathan and Cassandra had taken 2 weeks for their honeymoon in Portugal. Nathan had wanted somewhere simpler, a cabin in Muskoka, but Cassandra had wanted Europe, and Cassandra had gotten Europe. They were barely back when I got a phone call from my son. He opened with small talk about the trip, Lisbon, the food, the heat. Then, after a few minutes of this, he said, "Dad, Cassandra and I want to come and see you this weekend. We have some things we want to talk through." "Things," I said. "Just plans, family things. We want to make sure everyone is taken care of. Cassandra's been thinking about the future a lot. She has some ideas." Cassandra's ideas. I wrote those 2 words on the notepad I kept by the phone and underlined them twice. They arrived on a Saturday morning in July, earlier than I expected. Cassandra was wearing a blazer in the middle of summer. She had brought a tote bag that looked like it held more than a weekend visit required. I made coffee, set out the butter tarts I had picked up from the bakery on Court Street, because Nathan had liked them since he was a boy, and we sat at the kitchen table. For the first 20 minutes, it was pleasant enough. Nathan asked about the garden. Cassandra asked whether I was finding the house too large now that I was on my own. I said it was fine. She nodded in the particular way of someone storing your answer away. Then she said, "Arthur, I hope it's okay if I call you Arthur. Nathan and I have been doing some estate planning of our own, and we thought it would be good to get a clearer picture of where things stand. In the family. Financially." I looked at Nathan. He was looking at his coffee. "I'm 63 years old," I said. "I'm in good health. I'm not sure what kind of picture you're looking for." "Of course," she said, and she smiled. "We're not trying to be morbid. We just want to make sure that if anything ever happened to you, there'd be a clear plan, so nothing gets tied up in probate, nothing gets complicated. We actually spoke to a financial planner, and she said the best thing in situations like yours is to have a clear designation of who controls what assets while you're still able to make those decisions yourself." "Situations like mine," I repeated. "Widowed, living alone, no formal power of attorney in place." "I have a lawyer," I said. "A lawyer is different from a plan, Arthur." I drank my coffee. I looked at the butter tarts Nathan had not touched. "I'll think about it," I said. Cassandra opened her mouth. Nathan put his hand on her arm, lightly, quickly, the gesture of a man who knew his wife well enough to know when to slow her down. She closed her mouth, smiled again. They stayed for lunch, and then they drove back to Toronto. I called Helen Parsons on Monday morning. What happened over the next 3 weeks changed the texture of everything. Helen, who had 30 years of experience in estate law and was not easily surprised by anything, listened carefully to what I told her and then was quiet for a moment on the phone. "Arthur," she said, "has Nathan or Cassandra ever mentioned the Summerland property specifically?" I thought back. "No," I said. "But I don't think they know about it." "Then keep it that way," Helen said. "For now." She explained what she recommended. A formal legal trust, structured so that the Summerland orchard and property were held separately from my personal estate, managed through the trust with Patricia named as co-trustee. This was not, Helen was careful to point out, about cutting Nathan out of anything. It was about protection. It was about ensuring that no one could pressure me into a decision I had not made freely. In my own time, on my own terms. It took 2 weeks to set up properly. I signed the papers in Helen's office on a Wednesday afternoon with the same pen Dorothy had used to sign her own will, which Helen had kept and offered to me without my asking. I sat there for a moment after I signed, thinking about what Dorothy had written in her letter, and I thought, "All right, love." I listened. Cassandra called me the following Friday. She did not lead with small talk this time. She said that she and Nathan had been going over their financial situation and that they were concerned about some things. She said they were worried about the cost of elder care in Ontario. Did I know what a private facility in Thunder Bay ran per month? She had done some research. She had some numbers. She walked me through them in a tone that was just warm enough to be insulting. Then she said, There's also the matter of assets you might be holding that aren't generating income for you right now. Property, for example. And there it was. I let the silence hold for a full 3 seconds before I said, I'm not sure what you mean, Cassandra. Well, Dorothy's family had some holdings in BC, didn't they? I just want to make sure you're not sitting on something that could be working for you. Or for the family. Dorothy's family had a lot of things, I said. I'd have to look into it, of course. No rush. She paused. We'd love to come back up in a few weeks. Nathan wants to spend more time with you, and I thought maybe we could all sit down with someone, a planner, or even just an advisor, just to get things organized. That sounds fine, I said. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table for a long time, watching the light change over the backyard. The garden Dorothy had planted when we first moved in was still there. The lilacs and the climbing roses, and the cedar hedge she had insisted on, even though it took years to fill in properly. I thought about how she had always been better at seeing people clearly than I was, how she had never disliked Cassandra exactly. She had just been careful around her, the way you are careful around something with a particular weight to it that you do not entirely trust. She had known, even before she was sick, she had known. They came back in August. This time, there was a third person with them. I opened the door and saw Nathan and Cassandra and a man I did not know in a gray suit carrying a briefcase and what appeared to be a portfolio of documents. Cassandra introduced him as a colleague. A financial and estate advisor, she said. His name was Daniel. He had a firm handshake and a rehearsed smile, and he did not meet my eyes for more than a second at a time. I let them in. I made coffee again, because I did not know what else to do with my hands. They sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Nathan had done homework as a boy, the same table where Dorothy and I had eaten breakfast every morning for 27 years, and Cassandra laid out what she called a proposal. It was, in simple terms, this: that I transfer the Summerland property and orchard into a jointly held trust controlled by Nathan, with Cassandra as co-executor, and with a stipulation that the proceeds from any future sale would be distributed according to a formula she's and this Daniel had apparently drafted together. There was paperwork already drawn up. Daniel had brought a notary's stamp. They were, quite literally, prepared for me to sign that afternoon. I read through the first page, then I set it down. Where did you hear about the Summerland property? I asked. Cassandra's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes did. Nathan mentioned it. I looked at my son. Nathan, I said, I have never spoken to you about the Summerland property. A silence came over the kitchen that felt very heavy. Nathan was looking at the table. Cassandra found some documents. When we were going through some of Mom's boxes, my boxes, I said. In my house, we were helping you organize. You went through boxes in my house, I said, without telling me, and found documents that had nothing to do with you and used them to build. I gestured at the papers on my kitchen table. This. Cassandra's voice, when she spoke, had lost its warmth entirely. Arthur, we're trying to protect the family's assets. If you were to need care in the next few years and that property had to be liquidated in an emergency, it could be sold for a fraction. Do not, I said. Tell me about the value of land my wife's grandfather broke his back on. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, I could hear a lawnmower going on the street. I want you to take those papers, I said. I want you and Daniel to leave this house. And Nathan, I'd like you to stay, please. I'd like to speak with my son. Cassandra started to say something. Nathan held up his hand, and this time she stopped. Daniel packed his portfolio without making eye contact. Cassandra picked up her tote bag. She did not say goodbye to me. She walked out the front door, and I heard her heels on the porch steps, and then her car door close. I sat at the table with Nathan for a long time without speaking. He was 44 years old. Had I mentioned that? 44. He had his mother's eyes. He had her way of going still when he was ashamed of something. She found the lease agreement, he said eventually, in a file box in your basement. She was looking for Mom's china pattern for the wedding registry, and she found it. And instead of telling me, I said, you let her build a plan around it. I thought. He stopped. Tried again. She said you'd never sell it on your own. She said it was just sitting there. She said we could make it work for everyone. For everyone, I said. Dad, Nathan. I made sure he was looking at me when I said the next part. Your mother owned that land before she met me. Her grandfather planted those trees in 1957. When she was dying, she made sure it would be protected. She did that because she knew, I think she knew, even then, that someone would come along with a spreadsheet and a notary and call it financial planning. I paused. She trusted me to hold on to it, and I have. He didn't say anything. The property is in a trust, I said. It has been for 6 weeks. Cassandra's papers mean nothing, Nathan. There is nothing to sign. There never was going to be. I watched the understanding move across my son's face. It was not a comfortable thing to watch. She doesn't know, he said. No, he sat back in his chair, rubbed his face with both hands. 44 years old, and he looked for a moment like a boy who had done something he could not undo. I'm sorry, Dad, he said. I know. I don't know how it got this far. I think I just let her take the lead on everything and I stopped. He shook his head. I stopped paying attention to what I actually thought. You're going to need to start paying attention again, I said. That's not a criticism. That's a fact. I refilled both our coffees. We sat there for another hour, just the two of us, and it was not easy, but it was honest, which is more than I could say for any of the conversations that had led up to it. Before he left, Nathan stopped at the front door and turned around. Mom would have been so angry, he said. Yes, I said. She would have. He nodded. He went out to his car. I watched him drive away, and then I stood on the porch in the August heat for a few minutes, listening to the neighborhood. The aftermath of that afternoon took some time to settle. Cassandra did not speak to me for close to 4 months. I did not find this difficult. Nathan and I spoke on the phone every couple of weeks, carefully at first, and then more naturally, the way a bone heals after a break, not invisible but solid again. I called Patricia and told her everything. She said, I told you about the research comment, didn't I? And I said she had, and she said she wished she had said more at the time, and I told her she had said exactly enough. I also spoke to Helen Parsons again, who noted for the record that the trust documents had been filed before Cassandra, and Nathan ever came back to Thunder Bay, which meant there had never been any legal vulnerability to begin with. You planned well, Helen said. My wife planned well, I said. I just listened. In October, I drove out to Summerland for the first time since Dorothy had died. The Hendersons, the family who leased the orchard, had left the key under the mat the way they always did when they knew I was coming. I let myself into the house, which smelled of cedar and of something I could not name, but that was particular to that place, and I walked through the room slowly, the way you do when you are trying to hold something. I went out to the porch and looked at the lake. Okanagan Lake in October is a particular shade of blue-gray that does not look real. The hills above it had gold and rust with the season. The orchard behind the house still had a few late apples on the branches, small and bright against the sky. Dorothy had stood on this porch when she was 6 years old. Her grandfather had taught her the names of all the trees. Her mother had made preserves in the kitchen every fall that she could still describe to me 20 years after her mother had died. I sat on the porch steps and I did not cry, exactly. But I stayed there for a long time. The 12 acres were still ours. Not mine. Ours. That was how I had thought about it from the beginning, and that was how I would go on thinking about it, as something Dorothy had put in my care, not in my name. There is something I want to say, if you have stayed with me this long. I have had people ask me, friends, mostly, people my age who are watching their own families navigate these same uncertain waters, whether I was wrong to keep the Summerland property a secret, whether I should have been more open, more trusting, whether the secrecy itself was a kind of damage. Here is what I think. There is a difference between secrets kept out of shame and quiet, kept out of wisdom. I was not ashamed of the orchard. I was not hiding it the way you hide something you've done wrong. I was waiting. I was watching. And when someone showed me, within 8 months of marrying my son, that she was willing to go through my private documents, without my knowledge, build a legal strategy around what she found, hire an advisor, show up at my kitchen table with a notary stamp, and call it family planning, I was grateful. Grateful that I had listened to Dorothy. Grateful that I had moved when I did. Dorothy used to say there were 2 kinds of people, those who asked, how do I protect what I have, and those who asked, how do I get what belongs to someone else? She was not cynical about it. She just thought it was worth knowing the difference. Nathan and Cassandra are still married. I do not know what the state of that marriage is, honestly. Nathan is private about it, and I do not push. What I do know is that when we talk now, he sounds like himself again. Like the boy who used to sit at the kitchen table doing homework, who loved his mother's cooking and hated losing at cards, and once drove 4 hours in a February snowstorm because I'd had a bad fall and he wanted to check on me himself. That person was still in there. He had just gotten lost for a while. I still call my daughter Patricia every Sunday. I still drive up to Summerland 2 or 3 times a year and sit on the porch and look at the lake. The Hendersons' youngest daughter has started helping with the orchard, and last October she brought me a bag of Spartans she'd picked herself, the same variety Dorothy's grandmother used to make into pies. I put them on the counter and I stood there for a moment thinking about how strange it is, the way certain things hold. The orchard is still there. The trees Dorothy's grandfather planted are still there. The view of Okanagan Lake that makes the world look mostly good, that's still there too. Some things, if you are careful enough, and quiet enough, and willing to listen to the people who loved you before they left, you get to keep.